Social Democrat who happens to be in the Liberal Democrat Party. And then he always reminds us that his party is actually a democratic party. Evan was that's his speech probably. Evan was the MP for Oxford and Abingdon. He lost by 176 votes to a Tory. What a shame that is. But he's still incredibly active in the party. He's vice chair of the Federal Policy Commission and he's a leading light in the Social Liberal Forum. And I'm really glad that you're here, Evan. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I say, Neil, it's very good that you have an Oxford graduate who didn't study PPE.
Absolutely right. Totally right.
I studied medicine. Unlike the Gini coefficient, I think you have to understand that to do it. Probably why I'm not doing it, because the ratio of politics lectures attended to physiology lectures attended by me was close to 1. But I'm a big fan of David, as he knows, and I can say that now without any suspicions, given he's not a constituent, by me departing rather than him. And his book, Decline of the Public, is a really useful document for arguments, debates, rows within the Liberal Democrats, whether that be, as it was for me in the past with David Laws or now with others. And Neil's right, I always declare myself to be a social democrat, and the Liberal Democrats actually are declaring themselves to be social democrats. Our national executive put into a motion that will be our strategy motion at our conference that we espouse the twin beliefs of liberalism and social democracy, and there wasn't too much of a fight to get that in, even because it's very hard to find the beards and sandals these days of the old Liberal Party within the Liberal Democrats. And I think what you heard today was a plea for a social democratic society, and that's what I hope realignment in British politics can realign around, a renewal of that plea. David said that socialism, we shouldn't be talking about socialism in terms of what Labour governments do, and I think it equally applies to all parties, but in my own case, we shouldn't allow liberalism or liberal democracy to be defined by what the Liberal Democrat leader says it is. Okay, and coming to the second point that Neil made for me, which is that party democracy is essential because we have public debates which define our policies and our ideals, which cannot be denied and can't easily be fixed by the leader, and therefore we will be deciding our way forward and criticising openly, and we'll be stating what we think on health actually in March the way forward should be, and I think that will not necessarily be comfortable for our leader. And I would urge all parties that seek to realign to give power to the members of the audience, members of the political party, members of the wider Labour movement, the wider social democratic and liberal movement, to empower them away from the inevitable. I'm sure this hasn't yet happened to Ed or to Caroline, 2 party leaders here, gosh, and a departmental head. And the politics of universities are far more brutal. But the point is that around party leaders gravitates the need to appeal to funders, the need to appeal to the media in their message, understandable, and therefore there have to be those checks and balances. I was struck by what David said, and this has flummoxed me, and we have to understand why, following the collapse caused by rampant capitalism, there wasn't a reaction away from centre-right parties towards the left, generally speaking, in elections in Europe, why there wasn't the benefit that there could and should have been. I mean, it's probably more complex than looking at who won the elections. There are complex drifts to be spotted, but it's surprising that we're still having to work so hard to argue against the inexorable assumption that a free market always delivers and minimal regulation is a good thing. And although maybe that argument's been won temporarily in banking, it applies to many other areas as well. In a social democratic society, and I was pleased to hear this resonate throughout David's speech, it seems to me the role of government is to put equity in, because there are I have 3 sort of ideals: rule of law, and apparently, according to Caroline, that was voted against by 200 and something to 20 something in the House of Commons just now, in respect of compliance with our treaty obligations. 220 to 20. What's happened there? Because the default, as David has explained, is untamed markets. And so so of those three, rule of law, freedom, equity, there's not enough fairness, equality, there's not enough policy input into equity, because there has to be proactive activity in those areas by political parties and governments. I would also add there's localism and accountability and futurism, which is about development aid and environmentalism as well, so I would go 3 by 3. And the one area I would disagree with David is his remarks about capitalism and democracy, if I may, because I think having the freedom to consume and invest is a requirement. It's not sufficient in itself, but it's necessary for there to be democracy. It's very hard to have a democracy that doesn't provide those freedoms, but that doesn't mean that it's a free market, but there must be freedom to spend. Now, it was nice to be reminded of the record of the Labour Party, because I think it is unreasonable to blame our fiscal problems on the spending of the last government, and I get frustrated and angry when I hear my party do that in government. It's part of the sort of 24-hour media and the need to do it as defending oneself partly. But the biggest failure, I think, was the failure to tackle equality, okay, despite what Ed quite rightly said was a relatively progressive approach if you looked at in isolation what was done in terms of tax and benefits. But there was a failure in equality, and we know that led to a failure in healthcare as well. So what we have to guard against in a social democratic society is the combination of privatisation and marketisation. Each one on its own can be controlled, but joining them together in the public services leaves no space for equity, because I tell you, if you ask an individual patient and say you're a consumer, okay, and you're in pain, who's the most important person in the health service? They would well, if it's a man, it would definitely be them. Okay, they wouldn't think about the needs of others in those circumstances. And the same, I think we'd say, with parents choosing schools for their children. They don't think about the fact that if they have choice, it might whether it's special, choice in terms of their class for grammar schools or their religion in terms of faith schools, what effect it has on other people. So fairness and equity is important. My final point really is the university's example, because David asked us to consider that. What Brown did is call for a free market, okay? And although I disagree with the government's policy on tuition fees, where they differed from Brown, it was to try and take the market out. And you heard today the efforts they're making to try and put equity in. But you cannot have a market, even in, I think, private goods, until you have fairness in access to it, okay? So even if you don't think that it's purely a public good, or there may be some merit in saying that university education being optional may be something that we can promote as a private good, it's got to be fairly accessible. So my plea for the future is twofold. An end to tribalism. I echo those thoughts, and that means people saying not join us, but make your party have as much ideology and policy overlap as us. And secondly, critical thinking, because it's easier to deal and to realign when you've got another ideology that has some overlap, and rationality. Okay, so let's have some critical thinking. Let's have agreement on what are sensible measures of outcomes for inequality, which we still don't have. That's a sort of cross-party working that can be done. And my new sort of enterprise, which is a Centre for Evidence-Based Policy, is really hoping to work across parties to try and get agreed outcome measures that we and you can measure commitment to, for example, social democracy against.
Thank you.